The fluorescent lights of the Dulles International Airport Business Lounge hummed with a sterile, almost clinical indifference to the chaos unfolding outside its frosted glass walls. Beyond those walls, the February snowstorm had transformed the nation's capital into a frozen battlefield. Flights canceled, tempers flaring, and thousands of passengers stranded like refugees in a war they hadn't signed up for. Sarah Mitchell clutched her complimentary cappuccino with both hands, feeling like an imposter in enemy territory. The leather chair beneath her probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. The woman across from her wore a cashmere sweater that likely exceeded her entire wardrobe budget. And the man in the corner, the one with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that swept the room like a predator scanning for threats, probably earned more in an hour than she made in a year. "You don't belong here," the voice in her head whispered. "You're a data analyst from Baltimore who got lucky with an overbooked economy seat. You're a fraud." But Sarah couldn't afford to listen to that voice. Not today. Not when Emma's surgery was scheduled for next week and the hospital was demanding the final payment before they'd even prepped the operating room. She opened her laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The report was due in 6 hours. The numbers were all there. Clinical trial results for Cardio-Z, a new heart medication that her employer Data Tech Solutions had been contracted to analyze. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect maybe, but that wasn't her job to question. Her job was to compile, format, and submit. Her phone buzzed, a video call request from home. "Mommy." Emma's face filled the screen, her 4-year-old features scrunched in concentration as she held the phone too close to her face. Behind her, Sarah's mother, Helen, adjusted the camera angle with practiced patience. "Hey baby girl, are you being good for Grandma?" Grandma made mac and cheese, the orange kind. Sarah smiled, even as her heart clenched. The orange kind. The cheap kind. The kind that came in a box for 99 cents because that's what they could afford. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Mommy will be home tomorrow night, okay? And then we're gonna get you all better." Emma's smile faltered. "Will it hurt? The hospital?" Sarah's throat tightened. How do you explain open-heart surgery to a 4-year-old? How do you promise everything will be okay when you're not sure yourself? The doctors are going to fix your heart so it beats strong, just like a superhero. And when you wake up, Mommy will be right there, I promise. After the call ended, Sarah stared at her screensaver, a photo of Emma on her 3rd birthday before the diagnosis, before the world had become a constant calculation of medical bills and insurance denials. Congenital heart defect, requires surgical intervention. Estimated cost $27,000 after insurance. The numbers had become a prison sentence. She'd sold her car, taken out 3 loans, worked overtime until her eyes burned and her hands cramped. And still, she was short. Still, the hospital administrators looked at her with that particular blend of pity and corporate efficiency that meant we'll do what we can, but... She pulled up the Cardio-Z report again. The data swam before her eyes, mortality rates, adverse reactions, statistical significance. It all checked out. It all made sense. So why did her stomach twist every time she scrolled past column Sigma 3? Elias Mercer hadn't chosen the darkest corner of the business lounge by accident. 23 years in corporate warfare had taught him that visibility was vulnerability, and right now, he was the most vulnerable he'd ever been. The burner phone in his pocket, not his personal device, never his personal device, contained a ticking bomb. 3 terabytes of data exposing the largest pharmaceutical fraud in American history. Clinical trials falsified. Death certificates buried. A medication that was supposed to save lives was instead ending them. And the company responsible had spent 2 years covering it up with the efficiency of a military operation. Vertex Dynamics, his company. The empire he'd built from nothing, now rotten at its core. No, he corrected himself. Marcus Vane's empire now. You were just the useful idiot who made him rich. Elias watched the woman with the laptop across the lounge. She'd been typing furiously for the past hour, pausing only to take that video call. He'd seen the child on the screen. The desperate love in the woman's eyes. The way her shoulders carried a weight that had nothing to do with physical burden. He recognized that weight. He'd carried it himself once, before his wife had decided that a whistleblower's spouse had no future in polite society. What caught his attention wasn't the woman herself. It was the logo in the corner of her screen. Data Tech Solutions. One of the 12 subsidiaries Vertex used to process clinical data through seemingly independent channels. A shell game designed to create plausible deniability. When she angled her laptop to avoid the glare from the window, Elias saw something else. Column headers. Statistical matrices. The unmistakable structure of a cardio-Z trial report. His blood ran cold. He knew that data. He'd memorized every fraudulent entry, every manipulated decimal point, every death that had been reclassified as unrelated to treatment. The woman was working on a report that would make her an unwitting accomplice to mass murder. Walk away, the smart part of his brain advised. You have enough enemies. Don't add a stranger to your problems. But Elias had stopped listening to the smart part of his brain 6 months ago, when he'd discovered that his life's work had been used to kill children. Children like the one on that video call. He stood before he could talk himself out of it. Sarah sensed him before she saw him, a presence that seemed to compress the air around her, demanding attention without saying a word. She looked up to find a man in his mid-40s standing beside her table, tall and angular, with the kind of face that belonged on magazine covers or wanted posters. His gray suit was impeccably tailored but rumpled, as if he'd been wearing it for days. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and a faint scar traced his left jawline like a secret written in skin. "Can I help you?" She heard the defensiveness in her own voice and hated it. "The data you're working on." His voice was low, controlled, with an edge that made her think of wolves. Column Sigma 3, there's a statistical anomaly that doesn't match the mortality baseline. Sarah's fingers froze over her keyboard. "Excuse me?" Cardio Z, Phase 3 trials. The numbers in Sigma 3 have been adjusted to mask adverse reaction rates. If you submit that report as is, you won't be an employee completing an assignment. You'll be a co-conspirator in fraud. Heat flooded her face, embarrassment and anger in equal measure. Who the hell did this man think he was? Some stranger wandering over to explain her own job to her? "I don't know who you are," she said, snapping her laptop shut. "But I don't need some random man in an airport lounge to mansplain data analysis to me. I've been doing this for 7 years. I'm not questioning your competence, I'm questioning the source data you've been given. And I'm questioning why you think any of this is your business." His jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Frustration, maybe, or desperation. Then it was gone, replaced by that predatory calm. "Because I created that source data," he said quietly, "and I know exactly where the bodies are buried." Sarah stared at him. The words didn't compute. They sounded like something out of a conspiracy thriller, not a conversation in an airport lounge. "You're insane," she said finally. "Probably." He slid a business card across the table. No name, no company logo, just a phone number and 2 words, "Truth matters. When you're ready to listen, call that number. But don't submit that report, not if you want to stay out of prison." He walked away without another word, disappearing into the crowd of delayed passengers and frantic business people. Sarah picked up the card, turned it over, then dropped it into her empty coffee cup. Crazy, she told herself, just a crazy man with delusions of grandeur. But her eyes kept drifting back to column Sigma 3. The announcement came at 7:47 p.m., crackling through the lounge speakers with all the warmth of a prison intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to continued severe weather conditions, all commercial flights from Dulles International have been suspended until further notice. We apologize for any inconvenience." The lounge erupted. Voices rose in protest. A woman in pearls demanded to speak to a manager. A man in a power suit slammed his phone against the wall. Sarah sat frozen, her mind racing through calculations. If she couldn't get to the DC office by morning, she'd miss the submission deadline. If she missed the deadline, she'd lose the bonus she'd been counting on. If she lost the bonus, Emma's surgery. Her hands were shaking when the concierge approached. "Miss Mitchell? There's an alternative option available. A charter flight departing in 40 minutes. It's a small aircraft, but the pilot is experienced with these conditions. Several other passengers have already booked. How much?" The concierge named a figure that made Sarah's stomach drop. $300. $300 she didn't have. But $300 was nothing compared to $127,000. Nothing compared to her daughter's life. "I'll take it." The Bombardier Challenger 604 looked like a toy compared to the commercial jets Sarah was used to. 8 seats, cream leather, polished wood accents, a rich person's idea of roughing it. She counted 4 other passengers, a middle-aged couple who whispered urgently to each other in French, a young man in a Harvard sweatshirt who hadn't looked up from his laptop since boarding, and her stomach clenched. The man from the lounge, the one with the conspiracy theories and the cryptic business card. He sat in the back row, watching her with those predator eyes. Of course, she thought bitterly. Of course he'd be on this flight. She chose a seat as far from him as possible, jamming her earbuds in and pulling up a podcast. If he tried to talk to her again, she'd pretend she couldn't hear him. She had bigger problems than some paranoid stranger and his wild accusations. The pilot's voice came through the intercom. "Good evening, folks. Captain Williams here. We'll be taking off shortly. Weather conditions are challenging but manageable. Should have you in DC in about 90 minutes. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened." Sarah pulled her belt tight. Through the window, she could see snow swirling like static on a broken television, illuminated by the runway lights. The engine whined, the plane began to move, and she closed her eyes. 90 minutes, she told herself. 90 minutes, and this nightmare day is over. She had no way of knowing that the real nightmare was just beginning. The turbulence started gradually. A slight shudder, a dip in altitude, the kind of motion that frequent flyers learn to ignore. Sarah gripped her armrest but kept her eyes closed, focusing on the podcast playing in her ears. A woman's voice discussed mindfulness techniques for managing anxiety. Breathe in, hold, breathe out. Your thoughts are just thoughts. They cannot hurt you. The plane dropped. Not a dip, not a shudder. A plunge, sudden and violent, as if the floor had been yanked out from under them. Sarah's stomach lurched into her throat. Her laptop flew off her tray table, crashing against the window. Somewhere behind her, the French woman screamed. "Folks, this is Captain Williams. We've encountered unexpected clear air turbulence. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The second impact was worse. Later, Sarah would learn about wake turbulence, the invisible vortex of disrupted air left behind by large aircraft, a phenomenon that had brought down planes before. The Airbus A380 that had passed 1,000 feet above them left a rotational wake that struck the Challenger like a giant's fist, sending them into an uncontrolled roll. In the moment, all Sarah knew was chaos. The plane tilted sideways, then inverted. Overhead bins burst open, spilling luggage like shrapnel. The cabin lights flickered, died, came back in a sickly emergency red. The Harvard student tumbled past her, his body hitting the ceiling that was now below them, with a sickening thud. Sarah's seatbelt cut into her hips. She was hanging upside down, blood rushing to her head, gravity pulling her toward what had been the roof. And then, a snap. A give. The click of a mechanism failing. Her seatbelt released. For one suspended moment, she hung in the air, weightless, untethered. She saw the curve of the cabin, the scattered debris, the red emergency lights painting everything in the color of blood. She saw the open space where she would fall, the metal edges waiting to break her. And then she saw him. The man from the lounge, Elias, though she didn't know his name yet, had unbuckled his own belt. He was moving toward her, pushing through the impossible physics of the spinning cabin, his face twisted with an effort that seemed to defy human limits. "No," she tried to scream, but no sound came out. He reached her just as the plane completed its roll, just as gravity remembered which direction it was supposed to pull. He wrapped his body around hers, one arm across her chest, one hand gripping the nearest seat frame. And when the service cart, 50 pounds of metal and ice and shattered glass, came hurtling through the cabin like a cannonball, he turned his back to it. The impact was a sound Sarah would never forget. Bone meeting metal, a grunt of pain that seemed torn from somewhere deeper than the lungs. The man's body convulsed against hers, shielding her, absorbing the blow meant for her. They fell together, hitting the cabin floor as the plane began to level out. Sarah's arm bent at an angle that made her scream. The man's weight pressed down on her, then went slack. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness claimed her was his face, inches from hers. His eyes were open but vacant. Blood trickled from his nose, his ear, the corner of his mouth. "Why?" she wanted to ask. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" But the darkness took her before she could form the words. The hospital ceiling was white. That was Sarah's first coherent thought. White ceiling, white walls, white sheets. After the red emergency lights of the plane, the whiteness felt almost violent. Her second thought was pain. Her left arm was immobilized in a cast, throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. Her ribs screamed when she tried to breathe deeply. Her head felt stuffed with cotton and broken glass. "She's awake." A nurse's voice, professional and kind. "Miss Mitchell, can you hear me?" Sarah tried to speak. Her throat felt like sandpaper. "Emma," she croaked. "My daughter. Your mother called. Your daughter is fine. She's been told you had a minor accident, nothing to worry about." Minor accident. Sarah almost laughed, almost cried. The images came flooding back. The spinning cabin, the falling cart, the man who had thrown himself between her and death. "The man," she said, struggling to sit up. "The one who saved me. Is he?" The nurse's expression shifted. Professional sympathy, the kind they taught in nursing school. "He's in the ICU. I'm afraid I can't share details about other patients. Please." Sarah grabbed the nurse's wrist with her good hand. "He saved my life. I need to know if he's alive." A pause. A calculation of rules versus compassion. "Room 412, the nurse said finally. "But you didn't hear it from me." Finding room 412 took Sarah 20 minutes. 20 minutes of navigating corridors in a hospital gown, one arm in a sling, head swimming with whatever painkillers they'd pumped into her. She passed police officers, hospital administrators, men in suits who looked more like lawyers than doctors. All of them seemed to be moving with unusual urgency, clustering around a particular wing of the ICU. The wing where room 412 was located. When she finally reached the door, she hesitated. Through the small window, she could see machines and tubes and monitors. The complex machinery of keeping a body alive when it wanted to die. And in the center of it all, a figure she barely recognized. The man from the lounge had seemed so formidable, so predatory. Now he lay motionless on the hospital bed, his head wrapped in bandages that covered his eyes, his body connected to a ventilator that breathed for him. The monitors beside him painted a picture in numbers and graphs that Sarah didn't fully understand, but the rhythm was clear enough. Slow, fragile, fighting. "You shouldn't be here." Sarah turned. A doctor stood behind her, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a name tag that read Dr. Priya Sharma, Neurology. "He saved my life," Sarah said. "On the plane. He used his body to shield me from—" Her voice broke. "Is he going to die?" Dr. Sharma studied her for a long moment. Whatever she saw in Sarah's face seemed to satisfy her. "Come with me." The consultation room was small and cold, designed for conversations no one wanted to have. Dr. Sharma pulled up scans on a computer screen, images of a brain that looked like a storm system viewed from space. Mr. Mercer sustained severe traumatic brain injury when the service cart struck the back of his skull. The impact caused swelling that's putting pressure on his optic nerves, resulting in what we call cortical blindness. Additionally, there's damage to the thoracic spine, affecting motor function in his lower extremities. Sarah stared at the scans, not fully comprehending. Cortical blindness? His eyes are physically intact, but the brain can't process what they're seeing. He's functionally blind. Whether that's permanent or temporary depends on how well we can manage the swelling. And his legs? Partial paralysis. Again, possibly temporary, but we won't know for certain until the acute phase passes. Sarah sank into a chair. The man had been walking, watching, moving with the coiled grace of someone who knew how to handle himself. Now he couldn't see, couldn't walk, because of her. "There's something else," Dr. Sharma said carefully. "Mr. Mercer, he's not an ordinary patient. His name has been flagged in our system. The police and federal agents have been waiting for him to regain consciousness." "Federal agents? What for?" Before Dr. Sharma could answer, the door burst open. 3 men entered. 2 in the dark suits Sarah had seen earlier, 1 in a police uniform. Behind them came a 4th figure, and this one made Sarah's blood freeze. He was younger than the man in room 412, handsome in a way that seemed almost artificial, with perfectly styled hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dr. Sharma," the smiling man said, his voice smooth as oil on water. I'm Marcus Vane, CEO of Vertex Dynamics. I understand you're treating one of my former employees. Former employee. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Mr. Mercer is in critical condition, Dr. Sharma said stiffly. He's in no state to receive visitors. I'm not here to visit. Vane's smile widened. I'm here to inform you that Mr. Mercer is wanted for questioning regarding allegations of embezzlement, corporate espionage, and falsification of medical records. My legal team has obtained authorization to search his personal effects. He produced a document, crisp and official-looking. Dr. Sharma took it, her frown deepening. This man nearly died in a plane crash less than 12 hours ago. Which is precisely why we need to secure any materials he might have been carrying. For evidence preservation purposes, you understand. Sarah watched the exchange, her mind racing. Embezzlement, espionage, falsification of records. The words didn't match the man she'd seen, the one who'd warned her about fraudulent data, who'd thrown himself into harm's way to save a stranger. Column Sigma 3. There's a statistical anomaly that doesn't match the mortality baseline. I created that source data. I know exactly where the bodies are buried. Understanding hit her like a second plane crash. He wasn't a criminal. He was a whistleblower, and the men in suits weren't here to investigate him. They were here to silence him. Excuse me, she said, stepping forward. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Mr. Mercer is a hero. He saved multiple lives on that flight. Marcus Vane turned his artificial smile toward her. And you are? Sarah Mitchell. I was on the plane. He shielded me from debris at risk to his own life. How fortunate for you. The words were pleasant. The eyes were not. But personal heroism doesn't negate corporate malfeasance, Miss Mitchell. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a search to conduct. The two suited men moved toward room 412. Sarah watched helplessly as they disappeared inside, feeling the walls closing in around her. Then she noticed something. On the rolling tray beside Dr. Sharma's computer, half hidden under a stack of papers, was a small pile of personal effects, items that must have been removed for Mr. Mercer when he was brought in. A wallet, a set of keys, and a watch. The watch was shattered, its face cracked and its band bent. But something about it caught Sarah's eye. It was too heavy, too thick, the kind of weight that suggested hidden compartments. She glanced at Vane's men, now occupied with their search. At Dr. Sharma, distracted by the legal documents. At the watch, sitting unguarded on the tray. You'll be a co-conspirator in fraud. I know exactly where the bodies are buried. Before she could talk herself out of it, Sarah's good hand closed around the watch. 20 minutes later, Sarah sat in the hospital cafeteria, the watch burning a hole in her pocket. She'd retreated here to think, to process, to figure out what the hell she was doing. The watch had a hidden compartment. Inside the compartment was a micro SD card, no bigger than her thumbnail. And on that card, if the dying man's warnings were to be believed, was evidence of the largest pharmaceutical fraud in American history. You're insane, she told herself. You're a single mother with a sick daughter. You have zero money, zero power, zero ability to fight a billion-dollar corporation. Give the card to the police and walk away. But the police were already here. Working with Vane. Searching the man who'd saved her life while he lay blind and paralyzed in a hospital bed. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Emma wants to say goodnight. Can you video call? Sarah stared at the message, then at the watch, then at her own reflection in the darkened cafeteria window. A woman with tangled hair and a hospital gown, and the look of someone who'd been pushed past her breaking point. She thought about the data in her laptop. Column Sigma 3. The statistical anomaly that masked adverse reaction rates. She thought about Emma's heart condition, about all the children who depended on medications that were supposed to save their lives. She thought about the man in room 412, who'd had every reason to protect himself and had chosen instead to protect her. Truth matters. God help me, Sarah whispered to her reflection. Then she started making a plan. Getting a comatose patient out of a hospital was not something Sarah Mitchell had ever imagined herself doing. It was the kind of scheme that belonged in movies, not in the life of a data analyst from Baltimore. But desperation, she was discovering, had a way of making the impossible feel merely difficult. She found an ally in Dr. Sharma. The neurologist had watched Marcus Vane's legal team with barely concealed disgust, her professional composure strained by the obvious power play unfolding in her ICU. When Sarah approached her with a wild story about whistleblowing and corporate fraud and a man who might be killed in his hospital bed if he stayed, Dr. Sharma listened. "I can't discharge him against medical advice," she said finally. "He needs constant monitoring. His condition could deteriorate at any moment." "I have medical training," Sarah lied, "nursing courses." This part was technically true. She'd taken a first aid certification class 3 years ago. "And I have a place to take him, somewhere they won't find us." Dr. Sharma stared at her for a long moment. "If he dies because you moved him? If he stays here, he dies anyway. You've seen those men. They're not here for justice. They're here for cleanup." Another long silence. Then Dr. Sharma did something unexpected. She wrote a prescription on her notepad, tore off the page, and handed it to Sarah. "Pain management and anti-seizure medication. You'll need both. There's a supply closet on the 3rd floor that's rarely checked between 2 and 3 a.m. And if anyone asks, this conversation never happened." The escape happened at 2:47 a.m. Sarah had spent the intervening hours preparing, stealing scrubs from an unattended laundry cart, memorizing the layout of the hospital, calling her mother with a story about an extended layover that she knew Helen didn't believe. The hardest part had been watching and waiting, tracking the movements of Vane's security team, identifying the gaps in their surveillance. The man, Elias Mercer, she now knew, thanks to Dr. Sharma, remained unconscious throughout. His vitals had stabilized enough that he no longer needed the ventilator, but his eyes stayed closed, his body motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "Please wake up," she thought as she disconnected his IV lines. "Please tell me I'm not making the worst mistake of my life." He didn't wake up. But he didn't die either. Getting him into a wheelchair was the easy part. Getting him past the nurse's station required a diversion. A fire alarm in the East Wing, triggered by a cell phone timer Sarah had rigged herself. Getting him through the parking garage required luck. Luck that the security cameras were pointed at the wrong angle. Luck that no one questioned a tired-looking nurse wheeling a patient toward a beat-up Honda Civic. Thank God for overbooking, Sarah thought grimly as she loaded Elias into the back seat. The rental car she'd reserved for her return trip was waiting exactly where she'd left it, covered in a thin layer of snow, but still functional. The drive took 4 hours. Her destination was a cabin in rural Virginia, her grandmother's place, abandoned since Nana's death 3 years ago. No one knew about it, except family. No one had reason to look there. And in a world where GPS could track your every movement and credit cards left digital breadcrumbs, a forgotten cabin with no internet connection and spotty cell service was the closest thing to invisible. Sarah pulled into the driveway just as dawn was breaking, her injured arms screaming in protest, her eyes gritty with exhaustion. The cabin looked smaller than she remembered, sagging slightly under the weight of neglected years. Paint peeled from the shutters, weeds had conquered the garden. But it was safe, it was hidden, and for now, that was enough. The first 3 days were the hardest. Elias drifted in and out of consciousness, never fully present, never fully gone. Sarah learned to read the language of his body, the way his breathing changed when the pain spiked, the small sounds he made when fever gripped him, the twitches and tremors that signaled something happening beneath the surface of his stillness. She fed him through a straw, changed his bandages with hands that shook, monitored his vitals with a blood pressure cuff she'd stolen from the hospital and a pulse oximeter she'd bought at a drugstore 3 towns over, paying cash. At night, when the cabin grew dark and the silence pressed in like a living thing, she talked to him. About Emma. About her marriage that had ended when Michael decided fatherhood was too expensive and disappeared to start over in California. About the data on the SD card, which she'd finally worked up the courage to examine. "You were right," she told him on the second night, sitting beside his bed with her laptop balanced on her knees. Column Sigma 3. The numbers were adjusted to hide adverse reactions. 93 people died in the clinical trials. 93. And they just erased them, recategorized them as unrelated to treatment. She scrolled through the files, her horror growing with each document. "There are children in here, Elias. Children with heart conditions. The medication was supposed to help them, and instead, Her voice broke. Instead, it killed them. If he heard her, he gave no sign. On the fourth day, he opened his eyes. Sarah was washing dishes when she heard the sound. A groan, low and pained, coming from the bedroom. She dropped the plate she was holding and ran. Elias was struggling to sit up, his bandaged head turning toward the sound of her footsteps. His eyes were open, but they moved without focus, searching for something they couldn't find. "Where am I?" His voice was a rasp, barely audible. "Who's there?" "It's Sarah, Sarah Mitchell, from the plane." She approached slowly, unsure if he'd remember, unsure if he'd understand. "You're safe. We're in Virginia, in a cabin. No one knows we're here." "I can't see." The words were flat, clinical, a diagnosis, not a complaint. There was impact, service cart, posterior cranial. The doctor said it might be temporary, swelling in the brain affecting the visual cortex. Cortical blindness. He sank back against the pillows, his jaw tight. "I know what it is. I've read the research." "Of course you have." Sarah couldn't help the edge in her voice. "You read everything, don't you? You know everything, except how to talk to people without sounding like a threat assessment." Silence. Then unexpectedly the corner of his mouth twitched. "You're angry," he said. "You should be." "I'm terrified. I kidnapped a critically injured man from a hospital, drove 4 hours through the night with a broken arm, and I'm now hiding from a billion-dollar corporation that apparently has the FBI in its pocket. So yes, I'm a little bit angry." "Why? Why am I angry? Why did you save me?" His unseeing eyes turned toward her voice, and for the first time, Sarah saw something other than predatory intelligence in his face. She saw confusion, vulnerability. A man who didn't understand kindness because he'd stopped expecting it. "Because you saved me first," she said simply. "Because you threw yourself in front of a metal cart for a stranger. And because," she hesitated, then finished honestly, "because if what's on that SD card is true, then you're the only person who can prove it. And I have a daughter with a heart condition, and I need to know that the medications she takes aren't going to kill her." Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "The data is real. Every file, every document. I collected it over 18 months. I was going to present it to the Senate Oversight Committee tomorrow morning." A bitter laugh. "That timeline seems optimistic now." "What happened? How did you end up on that plane?" "Marcus Vane happened." The name came out like a curse. "My former COO, the man I trusted to run operations while I focused on research. Turns out he's been running a parallel operation for years. Falsifying trial data, bribing FDA inspectors, burying evidence. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd already positioned himself to take control." "So you became a whistleblower." "I became a target." Elias shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his damaged spine. "The charges against me, embezzlement, fraud, espionage, they're all fabricated. Vane knows that if I testify, his entire operation collapses. So he's doing what any cornered predator does. He's trying to eliminate the threat." Sarah absorbed this. "The men at the hospital, they weren't really FBI?" "Some of them might be. Vane has connections everywhere. Law enforcement, judiciary, regulatory agencies. When you have enough money, you can rent anyone's conscience." "Then how do we fight him? How do we get the truth out?" Elias turned his head toward her voice again, and despite his blindness, his gaze felt uncomfortably penetrating. "We? There is no we, Sarah. You've already risked too much. Take the SD card, mail it to a journalist, and disappear. Go back to your daughter, pretend you never met me." "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because they already know who I am." Sarah's voice was steady, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "The woman at the hospital, she saw my face, heard my name. Vane's people will trace me, and when they do, they'll find Emma." She moved closer, close enough to touch the edge of his bandages. "You made this my fight the moment you stood between me and that cart. So stop trying to be noble and start telling me how we win." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. Then he reached out, his hand finding hers with surprising accuracy. "You're either very brave or very stupid," he said. "Probably both." Sarah's fingers curled around his. "Now tell me about Marcus Vane's weaknesses. There must be something." The days developed a rhythm. Sarah played nurse, caretaker, and guard. She changed Elias's bandages, administered his medications, helped him relearn the basic tasks that his injuries had stolen. Eating without seeing, moving without falling, existing in a darkness that had no end. In return, Elias talked. He told her about Vertex Dynamics, how he'd founded it at 23 with nothing but a brilliant algorithm and a burning desire to change medicine forever. How the company had grown, absorbed by its own success, until it became something he no longer recognized. How Marcus Vane had smiled at board meetings while quietly building an empire of corpses. 93 deaths in the trials, Sarah said one evening, scrolling through the data again. But the medication is already on the market. How many more since then? Impossible to know. The adverse events get reported to a database that Vane controls. Any death that can be attributed to something else, underlying conditions, other medications, lifestyle factors, gets reclassified. So hundreds, maybe thousands. Maybe. His voice was flat. It's the kind of math that keeps me awake at night, that kept me awake when I could see the ceiling. Sarah looked at him. This man who had built an empire and watched it turn to poison, who carried the weight of countless deaths on shoulders that could barely hold him upright. She thought about Michael, who had fled from responsibility at the first opportunity. About her father, who had promised to stay and hadn't. You could have run, she said, taken your money and disappeared, started over somewhere they couldn't find you. I thought about it, a pause, for about 30 seconds. What stopped you? A file. Patient number 847. 7 years old, heart defect, same as your daughter. Cardio Z was supposed to save her life. His hand found the edge of the blanket, fingers tightening on the fabric. She died 3 weeks after starting treatment. The official cause of death was listed as complications from pre-existing condition, but the data showed elevated cardiac enzymes consistent with drug-induced cardiomyopathy. She didn't die from her heart defect. She died because we poisoned her. Sarah's chest constricted. What was her name? Lily Chen. He said it like a prayer. She had a younger brother. He was in the hospital room when she died. He held her hand until the very end. How do you know that? Because I was there. His voice cracked for the first time since she'd known him. I went to the hospital, sat in the cafeteria, watched her family fall apart. I couldn't stop it from happening, so I told myself I would bear witness, as if that somehow made it better. Sarah set down the laptop and moved to the edge of his bed. Carefully, gently, she took his hand. It doesn't make it better, she said. Nothing makes it better. But you're not running anymore. You're fighting. That matters. His fingers tightened around hers. I don't know how to fight anymore. I can't see. I can barely walk. Vane has all the resources, all the connections, all the time in the world, and I'm lying in a cabin in Virginia, dependent on a woman I nearly got killed. That woman has a name, and she's not done with you yet. He laughed. A real laugh, rough and surprised and almost healthy. You're remarkable. Has anyone ever told you that? My mother. Usually when I'm doing something stupid. This definitely qualifies as stupid. I know. Sarah smiled, even though he couldn't see it. But I've got a data analyst's brain and a mother's stubbornness. Let's see how far that gets us. It happened on the 8th day. Elias's beard had grown wild during his unconscious days, a dark tangle that made him look less like a tech billionaire and more like a castaway. Sarah had been meaning to address it, but the intimacy of the act had made her hesitate. There was something too personal about touching a man's face, about holding a blade to his throat. It crossed a line she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. But that morning, watching him struggle to eat oatmeal without being able to see the spoon, watching the frustration harden his jaw beneath that unkempt growth, she decided to stop hesitating. I have a proposition, she said, setting down her coffee cup. He turned toward her voice, a habit he'd developed over the past week. His unseeing eyes never quite found her face, but the orientation was close enough to feel like genuine attention. I'm listening. You look like a Victorian shipwreck survivor. It's disturbing. I'm going to shave you. A long pause. Then, unexpectedly, is that an order or a request? Does it matter? It does to me. His voice was quiet, serious. Everything that's happened to me lately has been out of my control. The crash, the blindness, the paralysis, you dragging me out of the hospital. I'm not complaining, I'm grateful. But I've lost the ability to make choices about my own body. If you're going to put a blade to my throat, I'd like to at least have the dignity of agreeing to it. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. She hadn't thought of it that way, the constant violation of autonomy that came with being helpless. Every time she'd changed his bandages, helped him to the bathroom, fed him like a child, she'd been taking something from him, something precious. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean." "I know you didn't." His expression softened. "And the answer is yes, please. I can feel the weight of this beard every time I move my jaw. It's making me feel less human than the blindness does." That morning, she decided to stop hesitating. "Hold still," she said, positioning herself beside his chair. He'd managed to sit up on his own for the past 2 days, a small victory that she'd celebrated with an extra helping of canned soup. "What are you doing?" "Shaving you. Unless you're going for the mountain man aesthetic." His hand rose to his jaw, feeling the rough growth. "I hadn't realized it was this bad." "It's impressive, in a shipwrecked Victorian explorer kind of way." She prepared the supplies: warm water, shaving cream, a straight razor from her grandmother's medicine cabinet. When Elias heard the rasp of the blade being opened, his body went rigid. "A straight razor?" "It's all I've got, unless you want me to try with kitchen scissors." "No." He swallowed. "The razor is fine." Sarah lathered his face with gentle strokes, acutely aware of how close they were. His breath on her wrist, the heat of his skin beneath her fingers. When she raised the blade to his throat, she felt him tense. "You'll have to tilt your head back." He complied, exposing the vulnerable line of his neck. The trust implicit in the gesture made Sarah's heart stutter. This man, who had built walls around himself, who calculated every risk and controlled every variable, he was letting her hold a blade to his jugular. "I could kill you right now," she said softly, meaning it as a joke. "Yes." His voice was equally quiet. "But you won't." "How do you know?" "Because you're good." He said it simply, as if stating a fact. "I've spent my life surrounded by people who wanted something from me. Power, money, connections. You're the first person in decades who wanted nothing but the truth." Sarah drew the blade down his cheek, careful and slow. "I wanted to save my daughter. That's not exactly altruistic. But you could have walked away. At any point. When you found the data, you could have handed it over to Vane and negotiated your freedom. Instead, you're here, in a cabin with no heat, shaving a blind man with a rusty razor." "The razor isn't rusty, you know what I mean." She wiped the blade, moved to the other cheek. "I thought about it, walking away. But I kept thinking about Lily Chen, about all the other children in those files, about Emma. Your daughter. My whole world." The words came out before she could stop them. "Everything I do, everything I am, is for her." When Michael left, she paused, surprised by the emotion rising in her throat. "When her father decided that parenthood was too hard and disappeared, I swore I would never let her feel abandoned, never let her feel like she wasn't worth fighting for." Elias was silent as she finished the shave, his face emerging clean and sharp beneath her hands. When she wiped away the last of the lather, she found him turned toward her, his unseeing eyes searching for her face. "You're crying," he said. "No, I'm not." "I can hear it in your voice." She laughed, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Fine, maybe a little. It's been a long week." His hand found hers, pulled it down until it rested against his now smooth cheek. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that Sarah forgot how to breathe. "When this is over," he said quietly, "I'd like to meet her. Emma. She'd probably ask you a million questions. She's at that age. I'd answer every one." They stayed like that for a moment, suspended in a silence that felt less like absence and more like presence. Then Sarah cleared her throat and pulled away. "Your face looks human again. Congratulations." "Thank you," he paused, "for the shave, and for everything else. Save your gratitude for when we actually win. If we win." "When?" She gathered the shaving supplies, her hands steadier than her heart. "I didn't drag you out of a hospital and drive 4 hours through a snowstorm to lose." The breakthrough came 2 days later. Elias had been walking, slowly, painfully, but walking, across the cabin's narrow bedroom when he stopped mid-stride. "Sarah," she looked up from her laptop. "What's wrong? Are you dizzy?" "No. He turned toward the window, the one that faced east. "I can see something." Her heart leaped. "What do you mean?" "Shadows, shapes." His voice was breathless with wonder. "There's light coming from the window. I can tell it's brighter there than the rest of the room." She was at his side in an instant. "That's amazing. That means the swelling is going down." Your brain is starting to process visual input again. It's like, he struggled for words, like looking through fog. Everything is gray and formless. But it's something. It's more than nothing. Sarah took his hand, squeezed it. This is good news. This is really good news. Don't get too excited. Recovery from cortical blindness is unpredictable. I might stay at this stage forever. Or you might keep improving. Or I might keep improving. He said it cautiously, like he was afraid to hope. They stood together at the window, watching the morning light that Elias couldn't quite see. And in that moment, despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the impossible odds, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. That night, they cracked the case. Sarah had been cross-referencing the SD card data with publicly available information about Vertex dynamics, financial filings, press releases, patent applications. It was tedious work, the kind of pattern matching that required patience and attention to detail. The kind of work she'd been trained to do. Elias. She sat up straight, staring at her screen. Marcus Vane has a Swiss bank account. Everyone has a Swiss bank account. Not everyone has one that received 17 wire transfers from Vertex subsidiaries in the past 2 years, transfers that coincide exactly with the dates when adverse event reports were supposed to be filed with the FDA. He moved toward her voice, his hand finding the back of her chair. You found a money trail. I found evidence that Vane was being paid to bury data. And here's the thing. She pulled up another document. The company that made those payments? Data Tech Solutions. My employer. The company that contracted me to analyze cardio-Z data. You were working for Vane without knowing it. I was working for a shell company that funneled money to cover up murder. Sarah's voice shook with fury. If I'd submitted that report, if I'd walked into that office and handed over falsified data, I'd be just as guilty as they are. But you didn't submit it, because some crazy man in an airport lounge told me not to. She looked up at him, really looked, at this man who had saved her life twice, once with his body, once with his words. You tried to warn me. I didn't listen. You listened enough to hesitate. That's more than most people do. It's not enough. She stood, pacing the small room. Children are dying, Elias. Right now as we sit here, children are being prescribed medication that could kill them, and I have the proof that could stop it. Then let's stop it. How? Vane controls the narrative. He controls the FDA contacts. He probably controls half the judges in DC. We can't just walk to a press conference and expect anyone to believe us. Elias was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had that calculating edge she'd come to recognize. The sound of a brilliant mind assembling pieces of a puzzle. We don't need them to believe us, he said. We need them to believe the numbers. And the numbers don't lie. What do you mean? Vane's Swiss account, the wire transfers, the timing. He smiled. That predatory smile she'd seen in the airport lounge, transformed now into something almost playful. If I can access my old trading algorithms, the ones I built before Vane locked me out, I can use his own money to destroy his company. You want to short sell Vertex stock? Not just short sell. I want to trigger a catastrophic collapse at the exact moment when the fraud is exposed. Make it impossible for anyone to ignore the truth. Sarah stared at him. That's either genius or insane. Probably both. He reached out, his hand finding her shoulder with surprising accuracy. But I'll need your help, your data skills, your analytical mind. And what happens when Vane finds out? When he sends his people after us? Then we'll be ready. His grip tightened. I'm done running, Sarah. I'm done hiding. If they want to stop us, they'll have to come through both of us. They found us on the 12th night. Sarah had known it was coming. She'd been careful, paid cash for everything, avoided main roads, kept her phone powered off except for brief calls to her mother, but perfection was impossible. Somewhere, somehow, she'd left a trail. And Marcus Vane had followed it. The first sign was the dogs. She heard them just after midnight, distant barking, drawing closer. Then, car engines. Then flashlight beams cutting through the woods surrounding the cabin. Elias. She shook him awake, her voice tight with fear. They're here. He was alert instantly, his damaged body responding with an urgency that seemed to override his injuries. How many? I don't know. At least 2 vehicles. Maybe 3. Weapons? None that I can see from the window. They might be trying to take us alive. Then we have one advantage. He swung his legs off the bed, grimacing as the motion pulled at his still healing spine. They don't know what we have. They don't know how much we've prepared. They had prepared. In the days since their breakthrough, Sarah and Elias had transformed the cabin into a crude fortress. Motion sensors on the perimeter, chemical compounds from household products that could create disorienting smoke, an escape route through the cellar that led to an old access road half a mile through the woods. But preparation and execution were different things. Sarah's hands trembled as she helped Elias to his feet. Her broken arm, still in its cast, throbbed with renewed pain. And somewhere outside, moving closer with every passing second, were men who had no intention of letting them leave this place alive. "The sedative," Elias said suddenly. "The horse tranquilizer. Do you know where it is?" "In the kitchen drawer." "Why?" "Because if they get close enough to touch you, I want you to have something to fight back with." Sarah found the syringe, left over from the days when her grandmother had kept horses on this property, still sealed in its sterile packaging. She'd discovered it while searching for useful supplies, had kept it more out of desperation than any real plan to use it. The idea of injecting someone with a substance designed to knock out a 1,000-pound animal made her stomach turn. But the idea of Emma growing up without a mother made her stomach turn more. "I've never," she started. "Aim for the neck, the carotid. Don't hesitate." Elias's voice was steady, teacher calm despite the chaos closing in around them. "These men aren't here to arrest us. They're here to make us disappear. If it comes down to your life or theirs, choose yours." Sarah tucked the syringe into her pocket. The first assault came at 2:17 a.m. Men in tactical gear, faces obscured by masks, moving with military precision toward the cabin's front door. Sarah watched them through a crack in the shutters, her heart hammering against her ribs. 4 of them, maybe 5. Each one moving with the confidence of someone who had done this before, who expected no resistance from a crippled man and a single mother. They were about to be surprised. "Now," Elias said. She threw the switch. The sprinkler system, rigged to spray a mixture of water and household chemicals, activated with a hiss. The compounds reacted, filling the front yard with a dense, acrid fog that sent the attackers stumbling backward, coughing and cursing. "Move," Sarah said, grabbing Elias's arm. "The cellar." They moved through the darkened cabin, Elias leaning on her shoulder, his recovering vision just enough to navigate the familiar terrain. Behind them, glass shattered, the attackers adapting, finding another point of entry. The cellar door was in the kitchen. Sarah yanked it open, helped Elias down the narrow stairs. The space below was dark and musty, smelling of earth and old wine. At the far end, barely visible in the emergency lighting she'd installed, was the tunnel entrance. A sound above them. Footsteps. Voices. "They're in the house," Sarah whispered. "Then we need to move faster." The tunnel was cramped and claustrophobic, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. Sarah went first, dragging herself forward on her elbows, her injured arms screaming in protest. Behind her, she could hear Elias following, his breathing labored, his progress agonizingly slow. "Come on," she thought desperately. "Come on, come on, come on." They emerged into cold night air, the tunnel exit hidden behind a tangle of dead brush. Sarah helped Elias to his feet, looking back toward the cabin. Through the trees, she could see flashlights moving, hear voices shouting orders. "The car," Elias said. "Where did you hide it?" "A quarter mile that way." She pointed, then remembered he couldn't see clearly enough to follow the gesture. "Northeast. Follow my voice." They ran, or tried to run, with Elias's damaged legs and Sarah's broken arm and the terrain working against them at every step. Branches slapped at their faces. Roots threatened to send them sprawling. The cold bit through their inadequate clothing, each breath a cloud of vapor in the February night. Behind them, someone shouted. A flashlight beam swept the tree line. "They found the tunnel," Sarah gasped. "Keep moving. Don't look back." But she did look back, and what she saw made her blood freeze. One of the attackers had broken from the group. He was running parallel to their path, moving faster than they could hope to match, circling around to cut them off. He would reach the car before they did. "Elias, I know." I heard him. His hand found her arm, gripped it tight. "Change of plan. You keep going. Get to the car. I'll draw him off." "No, Sarah." I said no. She pulled him behind a massive oak tree, pressing them both into the shadows. "We do this together or not at all." The footsteps grew closer. Sarah could hear the man's breathing now, heavy and controlled. Professional. She remembered the syringe in her pocket, remembered Elias's words. "Aim for the neck." The carotid. "Don't hesitate." Her hand closed around the plastic casing. The man rounded the tree. He was bigger than she'd expected, 6 feet at least, with shoulders that seemed to block out the sky. His eyes, visible through the tactical mask, registered surprise at finding them so close. His hand moved toward his belt, toward what was probably a weapon, and Sarah moved. Later, she wouldn't be able to explain where the speed came from. The strength. The absolute clarity of purpose that turned her body into an instrument of survival. One moment she was frozen in terror. The next she was lunging forward, the syringe in her good hand, the needle finding flesh. The man went down hard. His eyes rolled back. His massive body crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. Sarah stood over him, shaking, the empty syringe still clutched in her fist. "Did you?" Elias's voice was incredulous. "Did you just take down a trained operative with horse tranquilizer?" "I did." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant, calm. "I really did. Remind me never to make you angry." Despite everything, the fear, the cold, the men still hunting them through the darkness, Sarah laughed. It came out half sob, half hiccup, but it was real. She had done something she never thought herself capable of. She had fought back, and she had won. "The car," she said, pulling Elias forward. "Now." The car was where she'd left it, hidden beneath a camo tarp she'd bought at a hunting supply store. Sarah tore off the cover, yanked open the driver's door, shoved Elias into the passenger seat. "Keys," he said. "In my pocket." She fumbled, her frozen fingers clumsy. The engine turned over once, twice, and died. "No." Sarah twisted the key again. "No, no, no. Battery's cold." Elias's voice was calm, even as running footsteps grew louder behind them. "Try again. Pump the gas." She tried. The engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. Sarah floored it. The car lurched forward, tires spinning on frozen leaves, then caught traction and shot down the access road. In the rearview mirror, she saw flashlights converging on the spot where they'd been parked, then falling away into darkness. "We made it," she breathed. "We actually made it." Elias said nothing. When she glanced over, she saw that his eyes were closed, his face pale with exhaustion. "Are you okay?" "I will be." He opened his eyes, turned toward her. In the dim light of the dashboard, she could see that he was looking at her. "Actually looking. I can see you. Not clearly, but I can see you. That's good." She was crying again, she realized. Tears of relief and fear and something else she couldn't name. "That's really good." "Sarah." His hand found hers on the steering wheel. "Whatever happens next, I want you to know." "Don't." She shook her head. "Don't say goodbye. We're not dying tonight." "I wasn't going to say goodbye." His grip tightened. "I was going to say thank you for believing me, for fighting for me, for being the person I needed when I couldn't be it for myself." She drove on through the darkness, his hand warm in hers, the road ahead uncertain, but no longer terrifying. Washington, D.C. was 4 hours away. They arrived just as dawn was breaking, the Capitol dome catching the first rays of light like a promise. "The shareholder meeting starts at 9 a.m., Elias said, scanning his burner phone. His vision had recovered enough to make out text, though colors and details remained blurry. "Vane will be giving his annual address." Perfect timing. For what? For the fall. The plan had crystallized during the drive, refined through quiet conversation and shared calculation. Sarah would deploy the data, the full SD card contents, cross-referenced with financial records, uploaded to every major news outlet, social media platform, and medical journal database simultaneously. Elias would handle the financial strike, using backdoor access he'd maintained in Vertex's trading systems to execute a massive short sell order against the company's stock, using accounts tied to Marcus Vane himself. It was risky. It was possibly illegal. It was definitely dangerous. But it was also brilliant. "There's something I need to tell you," Sarah said as they parked in a garage near the convention center where Vertex's meeting was being held. "About the data deployment." Elias turned toward her. His eyes were clearer now, more focused. She could almost believe he was seeing her properly. "I added something to the package, a personal statement. My name, my credentials, my experience with the data manipulation. I'm going on record as a whistleblower. Sarah? Don't try to talk me out of it. I know the risks. But if we're going to blow this wide open, it needs a human face, and I'd rather it be mine than yours. Why? Because you've already sacrificed enough. She touched his face, the gesture now familiar between them. You saved my life. You showed me the truth. Now let me help carry the weight. He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. You're going to destroy your career. I know. They'll come after you legally. Probably. You might go to jail. Then I'll go to jail knowing I did the right thing. She smiled, though her heart was racing. Emma will understand, someday. Elias pulled her into his arms. It was the first time he'd initiated physical contact, and the surprise of it made Sarah's breath catch. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. You're the bravest person I've ever met, he murmured. I learned from watching you. They stayed that way for a moment, drawing strength from each other. Then Sarah pulled back, squared her shoulders, and opened her laptop. Ready? Ready. She pressed enter. The data went live. The convention center was chaos. Sarah and Elias entered through a side door, avoiding the main lobby where security was checking credentials. They moved through service corridors, following signs toward the main auditorium where the shareholder meeting was already in progress. On the screen of her phone, Sarah watched the results of their work unfolding in real time. The data was spreading. Shared, retweeted, downloaded, analyzed. News alerts were popping up. Breaking: leaked documents allege massive fraud at Vertex Dynamics. Pharmaceutical giant accused of hiding clinical trial deaths. Former CEO claims billion-dollar cover-up. And on the financial feeds, Vertex stock plummeting. Down 15%, down 25%, down 40%. It's working, she breathed. Not yet. Elias's eyes were fixed on a different screen, the trading dashboard on his burner phone, where numbers were scrolling faster than Sarah could follow. The short sell isn't complete. I need access to the main server to execute the final order. Where? The security office. There'll be a terminal connected to the building's network. They found it 2 corridors away. A small room with a glass window, a bored-looking guard reading a newspaper. Elias walked toward the door as if he belonged there, his posture confident despite his limping gait. Excuse me, he said to the guard. I'm looking for the IT support office. End of the hall, sir. The guard barely glanced up. But they're probably busy with... He never finished the sentence. Elias had moved, quick and precise, his elbow connecting with a nerve cluster in the guard's neck. The man slumped unconscious. Jesus, Sarah hissed. You didn't tell me you could do that. I have hidden depths. Elias was already at the terminal, fingers flying over the keyboard. Cover the door. Sarah stood watch as Elias worked, her heart pounding with every footstep that passed in the corridor outside. Through the glass, she could see the guard's newspaper, still open to the crossword he'd been solving. 7 letters across. Downfall. Done. Elias pushed back from the terminal. The order is executing. Vane's personal accounts are now being used to bet against his own company. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, he'll be bankrupt. Then let's get out of... The auditorium doors burst open down the hall, voices shouting, running footsteps. They know we're here, Sarah said. Then let's make sure they see us. The main auditorium was packed with shareholders, journalists, and industry executives. On the massive screens flanking the stage, Marcus Vane's face beamed down at the crowd, frozen mid-smile in what had clearly been a prepared presentation. But the presentation was no longer playing. Instead, the screens showed a video, a recording that Sarah had included in the data package, pulled from Vertex's own internal servers. A recording of a board meeting 3 years ago, where Marcus Vane had stood before his executives and calmly discussed the need to adjust clinical trial results to meet FDA approval deadlines. The adverse event rate is too high, Vane's voice boomed through the auditorium speakers. We need to reclassify. Deaths from pre-existing conditions, deaths from user error, deaths from anything except our product. But sir, the actual data. Destroy the actual data. I want new numbers by Friday. The auditorium erupted. Journalists scrambled for their phones. Shareholders surged toward the exits. And on the stage, the real Marcus Vane, the living, breathing version, stood frozen, his face draining of color as he watched his empire crumble in real time. That's when Elias walked in. He moved slowly, leaning on a cane he'd found somewhere, his face still bearing the marks of his injuries, but his presence was unmistakable. The crowd parted for him, murmuring, pointing. "Elias Mercer," someone shouted. "The former CEO?" "The whistleblower," someone else corrected. Elias reached the edge of the stage. Marcus Vane stared down at him, his handsome face contorted with rage. "You," Vane spat. "You were supposed to be dead." "Sorry to disappoint." Elias's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "But I thought you'd want to see the final numbers. Vertex stock is down 63%. Your personal accounts have lost approximately $400 million in the past 30 minutes, and there are federal agents waiting outside with warrants for your arrest." "This isn't over, Mercer. I have lawyers. I have connections. You have nothing." Elias looked up at the screens, where the damning video was still playing on a loop. "The data doesn't lie, Marcus. It never did." As if on cue, the auditorium doors opened again. Men and women in FBI windbreakers entered, moving with purpose toward the stage. Marcus Vane ran. He made it approximately 15 feet before two agents tackled him to the ground. Sarah watched from the back of the auditorium, tears streaming down her face. Elias found her in the crowd, his healing eyes searching until they locked onto hers. He smiled, a real smile, warm and unguarded, and held out his hand. She took it. The press conference was held on the steps of the Hart Senate office building, where the new Vertex Oversight Committee had just concluded its final hearing. Sarah stood at the podium, Emma fidgeting beside her, squinting in the bright June sunlight. Behind her a banner read, "The Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Pharmaceutical Accountability." It still felt surreal to see her name on something so official, so permanent. 6 months ago, she'd been a data analyst, struggling to make rent. Now she was a household name, the woman who had brought down a corrupt empire, who had stood up to billionaires and won. But Sarah didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a mother who had gotten lucky, a woman who had stumbled into the right place at the right time, and who had been saved by a man who had no reason to save her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice steady despite the dozens of cameras pointed at her face. 6 months ago, I was a data analyst struggling to pay for my daughter's surgery. Today, I'm here to announce that the Sarah Mitchell Foundation for Pharmaceutical Accountability will begin operations next month, funded by settlements from the Vertex Dynamics fraud case. Applause scattered through the crowd. Emma tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Mommy, I'm bored." "I know, sweetie. Almost done." She looked out at the sea of faces. Journalists, politicians, activists, survivors, families who had lost children to cardio-Z, whistleblowers who had been silenced by corporations just like Vertex. And there, at the edge of the crowd, a tall figure leaning on a cane. Elias's vision had fully recovered 3 months ago. His mobility was still compromised. The doctors said he might always walk with a limp, a permanent reminder of the night he had thrown himself between a stranger and death. But his eyes were clear and bright as they met hers across the distance. He was smiling. That small, private smile she had come to know during their weeks in the cabin. The smile that said, "I see you. I'm proud of you. You're not alone." "The foundation will work to ensure independent oversight of clinical trials," Sarah continued, "and provide support for whistleblowers who risk everything to expose corporate wrongdoing. Because the truth—" She paused, swallowed, felt the weight of everything they'd been through. The crash. The hospital. The cabin. The siege. The trial that had dominated headlines for months, that had ended with Marcus Vane sentenced to 47 years in federal prison for fraud, conspiracy, and involuntary manslaughter. "The truth doesn't protect itself," she said finally. "It needs people brave enough to fight for it. People like Elias Mercer, who sacrificed his career, his health, and nearly his life to expose corruption. And people like all of you, who refused to look away when the evidence came to light." More applause. Emma was now openly sulking, kicking at the podium with her sparkly sneakers. Sarah wrapped up her remarks, thanked the crowd, and stepped away from the podium into a swarm of reporters' questions. "Miss Mitchell, what's next for the foundation?" "Sarah, can you comment on the rumored film adaptation of your story? Any truth to the reports that you and Elias Mercer are romantically involved?" She ignored them all, cutting through the crowd toward the man who had changed her life. Elias met her at the bottom of the steps. "Nice speech," he said. I learned from watching Senate hearings, you gave some pretty impressive testimony yourself. I had good material. He knelt down. Meeting Emma at eye level, his movements were slower than they used to be, more careful, but his eyes were warm and his smile was genuine. And you must be the famous Emma. Your mom talks about you constantly. Emma studied him with the unblinking scrutiny of a 4-year-old. You're the man who saved Mommy on the airplane. That's right. She said you were very brave. She's pretty brave herself. Emma considered this for a long moment, her small face serious. Then, with the decisive authority of her age, she nodded. Okay, you can come to dinner. Elias laughed, a full, genuine laugh that made Sarah's heart swell. It was a sound she'd heard more often lately, as the weight of his guilt slowly lifted. He was learning to forgive himself, learning that the children he hadn't been able to save didn't make the ones he had saved any less important. I'd be honored, he said to Emma. They walked together toward the parking area, Emma chattering about her kindergarten class and her favorite cartoons and the scar on her chest from her surgery. It looks like a zipper, see? And the boy in her class who ate glue. Sarah's phone buzzed with messages, media requests, congratulations, follow-ups on foundation business. But she ignored them all. Some moments were more important than publicity. So, Elias said, his hand finding hers with the same natural ease it had developed in that cabin. What now? Now we go home. I make dinner, you help Emma with her alphabet blocks, and tomorrow. Tomorrow we keep fighting. Sarah smiled. Exactly. They had talked about the future, in the months since their names had become synonymous with corporate accountability. Elias had offered to fund Emma's education, to pay off Sarah's debts, to set her up with a lifestyle she'd never imagined. She had refused everything except the foundation, which had been her idea, not his. I don't want to owe you, she'd told him. I don't want what we have to be about money. Then what do you want it to be about? She'd thought about that question for a long time. About the man who had warned her in an airport lounge, the stranger who had shielded her with his body, the patient she had nursed back to health, the partner she had fought beside. Trust, she'd said finally. I want it to be about trust. And it was. The sun was warm on their faces. The future was uncertain, but no longer terrifying. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah Mitchell felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not a victim. Not a survivor. A fighter. And as they walked into the sunset, the cliché made real, made earned by everything they had survived, Sarah looked down at Emma's hand in hers, at Elias's hand in her other, and knew that this was what the truth looked like. Not a headline or a statistic or a court verdict. Just people. Holding on to each other, refusing to let go. And so, from the ashes of corruption, two broken souls found wholeness in each other. Truth prevailed. Love endured. Hope was reborn. Thank you for staying until the very end of this incredible journey. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. New captivating stories await you every single day. See you in the next one.